coaches tend to be routinely challenged with open up questions and answers and discussions that can help us provide new perspective to some of these difficult scenarios. So that's what we're trying to do here. So just a quick couple of announcements. One, we value your engagement and feedback as an audience. Please contact us with any suggestions that will add value to this time. If there's something that you think, man, it would have been great if you would have done that, there will be a post-presentation survey. We'd love for you to give us your feedback there. Also, during the presentation, if you have any questions or comments, you could shoot them to Jeff and I. We'll be maintaining a Q&A backlog as we go through our presentation. And again, there is a poll that's open right now if you wouldn't mind taking that in your WebEx session. I have our emails there. We will have those again at the end, and then we'll try to send out this deck to everybody who registered so that they can have this deck and Heidi's content to review in the future if they needed to. We like to start up with a quote. I wanted to share this one today. Don't count the things you do the things that count. That's from a speaker and writer that's fascinating me right now, Zig Ziglar. He's a great leadership, motivational speaker. And this encouraged me to take some challenging steps recently in the Agile world that I otherwise might not have. But it's not about the number of things that we do, but doing the things that really matter. So I just want to encourage you with that. Our agenda for today is going to be 4 to 4:05, giving people time to join. Right now we're in the kickoff session. We're doing pretty good with that. We have about 2 minutes before we hand over the ball to Heidi and she gets started with her presentation. So just want to do a quick glance of who all and how many of everybody is with us. Let's take a look at how we're doing on our attendance right now. At the moment, we've got 50 people in attendance. So thank you guys who are able to join and get in to hear us. It looks like only 26 in a teleconference, so some people might still be dialing in as we go forward. And if you have any technical difficulties, again, you can message me or Jeff as we go forward. I'm Isaac. That's Jeff. And Heidi will be talking to us in just a second. Then finally, we'll go into our main topic. So today is going to be a bit interesting. After talking with Heidi about her presentation, there is a chance that we might have some additional question and answers or content that flows over our time. So what's going to happen today is Heidi's going to speak, and still at 4:50 to 4:55, we'll jump in and we'll wrap up the main portion of this speaking, again, to allow anybody who has that next meeting to get to or those things that got to get ready, allow you time to go and prepare that and to make it to your next meeting. What we will do, for those who can, is we'll stay on the line and give Heidi some Q&A, and we'll try our best to capture those, and we'll capture them on the recording of this as well, so that if there's a question you have about this and you want to delve a little deeper into Heidi's knowledge or Jeff's knowledge or my knowledge, you're definitely welcome to do that, and we can have an extended time of question and answers. So if you're able to hang around after the meeting's over, great. We'd love to have you with us. If not, we will wrap up at our promised time of 5 till, and then you can catch the wrap up or in the recording or maybe in the email that we send it after it's all said and done. All right, so that being said, I think we are good to pass the ball over to Heidi. Jeff, any last thoughts as I start shifting the ball over to Heidi and making her the presenter?
No, I'm just pretty excited to have Heidi. On board. You know, Heidi came forward, and it's a great example that, you know, we always look for somebody to speak on a topic or present something that they know a lot about. And Heidi is just, you know, it's been so much fun working with you and organizing this, and you've been so engaged, and I appreciate that. And I'm just really looking forward to what you have to say and learning a little bit more about you, and of course, learning a little bit more about Scrum, Kanban, and Scrumban.
Excellent. And Heidi, right before I kick it over to you, we are going to share the results of the survey. And so you can see there that 22 out of 32 respondents use Scrum, so 69% is our high response there. And then you've got scaled Agile methods. It looks like we have a none leading the way with 47% is the highest return there. So primarily we have people using Scrum, or Waterfall comes in tied about with Kanban. So very interesting poll results. So thank you everybody for doing that. So Jeff and I will go quiet now. Again, you can IM us or message us in it, or send us something, questions or answers, but we're going to hand it over to Heidi, and we will be listening in for her. Heidi, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your time today, and everybody who's able to join. So we do have a lot of content to get through today, so I'll just jump right in and I'll introduce myself a little bit. My passion has always been finding the right process for the business and the team. And I come from a long line of people saying there's got to be a better way, and I say if I had a middle name, it would be there's got to be a better way. My dad's uncle actually went into exile after fighting a duel trying to improve the political process in Argentina by ridding it of corruption. My dad got 3 patents improving an engineering process for ceramics drying at Corning ink, and I got a medical patent for finding a better way to deliver light to human tissue. So process improvement and doing things better is definitely a passion of mine. And a lot of people have had many questions about the various Agile and Lean frameworks, and so I wanted to share with the community what I had learned through my own experiences about what works and what doesn't work. So we're going to discuss the basics of the 3 frameworks, Scrum, Kanban, and Scrumban, the similarities and differences between them, and how it's possible to select the best one for your particular situation. So I don't want you to think that these are the only frameworks. Over time, there have been various management ideas, methods, frameworks, and practices that people have come up with. So please, when you're considering an Agile method, do your homework and figure out which one might work best for you. And so why are we even having this talk today? And I want to arm you with some knowledge. What happens when people go into a rush? Let's say you're transitioning from waterfall to Agile, and you're just in the beginning of that transition and it comes crunch time. Well, people will use what they know won't work if they don't have an alternative that doesn't completely terrify them. And so sometimes those new Scrum processes, new Scrum teams, and all those unknowns are really scary to people. So I'm going to hopefully send you back to your organizations with some knowledge so that you could go and not terrify people with the changes that you are proposing, and be able to explain why you are suggesting these changes as well. So I always say, why does everybody want to do Scrum? It's obviously the most popular framework. And for good reason. It has lots of good things. But consider, I met a while back with a company to do some consulting, and they told me, we need to do Agile right or not do it at all. So we called you, we need your help. Here's the situation. We have our Scrum teams, and our mobile developers are typically working on 3 projects at the same time, plus they're fixing bugs from the previous project. So how would you set up the sprints? And I just thought, you can't set up sprints that way. But that's what they wanted to do. He's like, no, we need to do Agile right. And another company, there was a scenario where QA was behind development, and everybody gasped when I suggested the developers might help the testers to get stuff through QA. And they said, oh my God, if management sees developers doing QA, they may realize they don't need us at all, so definitely not going to help out. And then another place, a larger company, they basically split up their teams into Scrum teams without any consideration to whether they were able to deliver value into that configuration, and they created a ton of cross-team and cross-division dependencies. The teams were trained, but middle and upper management were still micromanaging and demanding deadlines. In short, nothing had really changed, so the teams were working much harder, much longer than under waterfall. There were new dependencies created that weren't there before, and the delivery manager says to me, Heidi, when will we see the faster, better, cheaper of Agile? We don't see it yet. And so this is a way, for me to say, Scrum is not a good fit for every single place and every single type of work. And when you're doing your research on an new Agile method that you're thinking about, and you look at the blogs and things, think about what kind of agenda these people might have, because lots of consulting firms definitely propose one framework over another, and you hear people saying Kanban is only good for this or that, or Scrum is only good for this or that, but pay attention to who is telling you these things. So I'm not a consultant, I'm not making any money, there's no tricks or sales tactics here. I'm just going to hopefully determine what's right for you when you leave this, this webinar today, right? The first thing you should consider when you're trying to implement a new Agile framework is the culture and communication norms. Do the people still micromanage? Do they send emails to somebody across the hallway, or do they go talk to them? If a manager has to make all decisions and teams are not empowered to make any decisions, and this will affect the framework that you are able to implement. And so obviously I'll go into these in more depth as we go through the different kinds of frameworks. Think about the reward systems in your company currently and who will benefit from these Agile systems or who will benefit from the previous method. If a director level or VP level is getting rewarded for delivering a project on scope and on budget and on time, and the teams are not rewarded, then this is going to reward the wrong behavior. And these are, you have to think of the reward systems when you're thinking about implementing an Agile teams. Also, think about whether or not you have a leader who's competent to lead and plan and execute change in your organization. If you're thinking about moving from waterfall to Agile process, there's going to be some resistance, and you need someone who's able to take charge and have those difficult conversations, right? This goes to the degree to which your company is willing to face the truth. Agile is all about change. It's all about continuous improvement. If you have a company that is not willing to hear the truth, if they don't want to hear that maybe the process isn't working right, if they're not willing to hear that their VP level tossed someone out of release planning, for example, as happened in my past, and not able to basically own the success of the Agile transformation, it's going to be very difficult to have a large-scale change going on in the organization. And also think about the nature of demand for product development. Do you have only new product development? Do you have maintenance at the same time going on with the same teams? Do you have companies with doing deep research? If you have teams doing deep research, and I worked with a developer back in the day, he was interfacing with bank systems for the very first time, and he could not estimate how long it would take him. And so in that case, he couldn't determine how long it would take him. So things like artificial intelligence, new research and things like that might, it will affect the kind of framework you're able to implement in your organization and the breakout of the teams, right? If you have a challenging product, the same thing, a very technical product, a research product. So I'm going to talk about the main concepts of Scrum. I'm assuming that you're all familiar with Scrum, but just for compare and contrast, I'm going to talk about the main ones, right? Time boxing your work, of course, delivering in 2 to 3 week, ideally, increments. You have self-organizing teams. What does that really mean? I mean that you give the team the goal and the team decides the tasks to get that done. Why does that create better teams? Because they own the work. There's Dan Pink's talk on what motivates us is really a great talk that you should listen to if you have not yet become familiar with it. And this is the way you develop really great and innovative products. Cross-functional teams provide a lot of value. Obviously, you want to be able to deliver something at the end of that sprint, and so you should have all these people working together to make sure that you can actually deliver something at the end of that sprint. You want teams who are able to collaborate closely, so ideally in real time or near real time. You want to be able to inspect and adapt and fail fast where needed. So as an example, when I was working at NASA, I had a woman who told me she wanted to develop she just wanted me to develop a form, and a person would fill out the travel information and click submit, and it would go to one email address. So it was just a web form. I was basically automating a paper form. And after 2 sprints, she came up with all these great ideas. Well, we already know who the guy is because he's on the network, so why can't we have it autofill this information? I want to know where he's going into, more degrees. So she kept adding more and more information. I want audit history. I want this business logic. And so at the end of the day, she ended up changing the application over time from a simple web form to a comprehensive travel routing application that, based on complex logic, delivered the application to one of 13 travel preparers. And so you can see how inspecting and adapting, if I had just gone ahead and delivered that web application that was the web form, this is actually not going to meet her needs. So after many years, that application is still in use today, whereas I'm sure the automated web form would not have met her needs in the long term. So that's kind of also what we mean by inspect and adapt and fail fast. And of course, we want to deliver potentially shippable increments. The value of us doing that at NASA was I was able to meet with her every 2 weeks, show her what we had done, and she was able to change her mind some over each subsequent sprint until we gave her exactly what she wanted. So we have some common challenges of Scrum. Not to say that you can't overcome these, but some of the common challenges that teams encounter are the teams fall into mini waterfalls. So for example, I'm doing design and development, and then I'm doing tests at the very end, and of course test falls off on that sprint, so I have to complete it in the next sprint. There's no product owner available to take that role full time, and especially in large organizations. There's a product owner that I was working with in the past that he had 5 different teams that he was working with, and he told me, but I'm only available 5% of the time for those 5 teams. 5% each time. And I was like, wait, 5 times 5, that's 25. He goes, oh, absolutely. I'm on the road the rest of the 75% of the time gathering input from other customers, so I'm definitely not available. And so you can imagine if you don't have a product owner available, it's really going to be difficult to do Scrum. There are urgent interruptions during the sprint. Like I said, if the team is handling production issues at the same time, then definitely it's very difficult to plan and commit and deliver your sprint goals. Cross-team dependencies, especially in multi-team and large organizations, is a common challenge where one team is waiting for another team to actually finish something before they can start working on it. Another one that I love about the challenge is misunderstood rituals that people often don't think about, right? When you're doing the poker planning estimation, it's not exactly the ritual, it's the conversation that happens around it, where why I think it's an 8 and why do you think it's a 13 and this person think it's a 5. And so management often misunderstands these rituals and believes them to be silly when it's really a way of getting people to talk about those things that not everyone had considered. Everybody has valuable input on the team. And then also the stand-up. In some organizations, the stand-up meeting becomes not updating each other, but actually just telling the Scrum Master what you've done that day so they can track it for management. And of course, sprints are arbitrary and can create poor behaviors. So no matter how well you plan, and you're just sure that you really can deliver exactly what you committed to, it always happens that you're rushing at the end of the sprint. And so I think the QA person might actually hurry out to finish the testing, because if you don't finish that testing on time, you're not going to get the points for that sprint, and that's a bad thing in some organizations. So sprints, there's no reason usually for it to be 2 or 3 week sprint. It's completely arbitrary, so be aware that it can create poor behaviors. And the last thing is, when you think about it, it's difficult to transform a large organization, especially if the organization is not really conducive to the culture of self-organizing teams, and this can create real challenges. So we have some challenges, and then we have times when it really won't work. So one of the times when Scrum just won't work is the team makeup is totally inappropriate. Imagine that it's not a cross-functional team. As an example, I had a team that was only architects, and it was about 21 people in this team. In this case, they definitely didn't have a product owner, not one product owner. They definitely were not a cross-functional team. And so in this case, Scrum is completely inappropriate for them. Scrum also won't work if you have, let's say, too many developers for the number of QA. You can have, obviously, the developers help out with QA, but if they're not willing to do that, or you have this culture where that's not going to happen, like I've worked in the past, then it just won't work. So you have to take into consideration what other things you can do to bring to light these problems. And remember, if you're doing Scrum, it's just in process. Nobody may necessarily know the extent of the problem when you have too few QA people on your team able to get stuff through tests. So that is one area where Scrum won't work unless things can be rectified. Where team members aren't fully dedicated. I've worked places where they were still using AS400 programming or COBOL or Fortran, believe it or not, and those team members were not fully dedicated to the Scrum team. We just leaned on them as needed. Or imagine if you had team members with other specialized skills, or even a legal team or a security team that they don't have to be dedicated full-time to your team. But if you continually rely on these people, then Scrum may not be a good fit for you. So if you're experiencing issues in your Scrum team, then Scrum may not be the most ideal fit. If you have very limited and specialized skill sets, like I said, this AS400 person that was going across a team, if you have a team, I had one team that had very specialized skill sets, and they were distributed across 5 countries. And they were definitely, they made up special skills, but they even weren't all cross-functional when you put them together. When time boxes are inappropriate. So in the beginning, I talked about research work. How can you estimate your work if you're doing very deep research and you're not sure how long that will take you? So if you're doing things for the very first time and it's very difficult to estimate how long it might take you to do, then time boxes might be inappropriate for this kind of work. Now, other places where time boxes might be inappropriate are things like this architecture team, where things that they were working on might have taken anywhere from a couple of hours to a couple of weeks to do. So there was no one way that we could break up this time box for them and say, this is what they can commit to in 2 weeks. When the direction changes daily, So I was working in a startup, and the CEO would come in and say, you know, randomly, like in the middle of the day, stop everything. I just sold this bank, and I promised them these features. So, you know, by, let's say, December 15th, I need these XYZ features to be done. What was the problem with that? These were not even on the roadmap. We hadn't even considered them, and so we had to change exactly what we were doing. But what happened after that? All this abandoned work that we had, we never went back to it. The direction just changed so rapidly that we couldn't actually, you know, keep a backlog of ready work to go, and so that was a place where Scrum just wouldn't work. Another place where, I mean, direction changes daily might be a place like where you have to incorporate maintenance work inside of your sprint. So I actually worked with a team that his team was also, the Scrum Master's team was also working on production issues as well as new product development. And every day they would report their percent on sprint that they had that day. Today I was 0% on sprint, today I was 90% on sprint, and so the whole team would go through that rigmarole every day. But he was able to devise this planning method where he would just say that he had them 70% allocated to new product development and the rest of the 30% was to maintenance work. And he was actually able to have the team commit and deliver what they had committed to, but this is not an ideal scenario. It's just a way to think about how you can make Scrum work if your organization wants you to have a Scrum team and they have to handle maintenance. But imagine if you never know the percent of maintenance work that's going to overtake your sprint. In that case, you can never get a backlog of work ready to deliver to your team because the direction just changes so frequently, right? And then how value delivered is measured. A lot of times people don't think about this, but if your team is measured by the amount of hours they sit at work versus what they're delivering, the value that they're delivering, this is an area that Scrum is just not going to be a good fit for the organization because they're not culturally ready, right? So a mismatch between Scrum roles and company culture is going to be at risk because the team, in companies that have hierarchical models and they're still doing command and control and telling the teams what to do, you're not going to get the benefits from Scrum. And this is one of my favorite cartoons for when Scrum won't work, right? It's not according to the fact that she delivered code, 15 lines of code that cured cancer. It's the fact that they wanted more lines of code. So this is another area where Scrum is not going to work well. So we have some challenges. We have some times when Scrum won't work, but it has some real advantages. So when we talk about Scrum, you've got less superfluous specifications. You have people able to collaborate, hopefully real time together, and not document 6 months of requirements up front and then hand them over to the team. So the team working closely together should really save a lot of time as far as specifications writing. There are less handovers, so the BA and the developers and the QA can work very closely together and not hand it off to another team. And this kind of communication creates very efficient products and delivery. So just like my customer at NASA who changed her mind, you've got some flexibility in roadmap planning. She saw what I had delivered, and then she changed her mind. It was a sort of gradual change. It wasn't completely opposite, but there is flexibility in roadmap planning because with feedback, I was able to change the idea of what we were delivering. And of course, less risk due to short iterations. Again, I was able to show her what I was doing, and she was able to change her mind and add things to what she wanted, and so this is much less risk. When you talk about risk, you also talk about having potentially shippable code, and so instead of writing code for 6 months or a year and then testing it, you're going to have something that's deliverable and tested in these small little batches, and so that also causes much less risk. You've got visible progress. Both due to the short iterations and due to the Scrum board, people know where things are at all the time. You've got the burn down charts, you've got the burn up charts towards the release, and so there is very visible progress due to these short time frames. One thing that people don't always consider as well is that commitment to the sprint goal can actually raise productivity. So now if you can get your team focused on one thing and they are aware of the goal and they're committed and dedicated to delivering this in this time frame, it can actually be really raise their productivity because they're not concerned with taking care of anything else. And the last advantage is that cross-functional teams provide great value. Definitely much less handovers, much close working relationship, and so that's actually very valuable to organizations, right? So when you go back to your organization, think about the things that I told you, and so I'm going to tie it all up by saying, Scrum is best for when a team is new to Agile and they have no idea how to get started. This is a way to introduce a new framework to them, and it's a very well-documented framework that's been around for a long time. And so if they want to try something new, that they have lots of guidance, then it's a great place to start with Scrum, right? When teams are stable, if you have teams that continually swap out members every month or two, it's not the ideal place for Scrum, because think about the velocity changing and ramping up team members. And you can still do it, but just know that that might actually change the velocity of teams, and they're working together. People talk about people's forming, storming, and norming and performing, and so that might change that dynamic a little bit. It's best for teams that are co-located or the same time zones, and obviously you can get around with that, and we all have distributed teams, even 9, 10, 12 hours difference, and we deal with it. But the best value is teams who can really communicate and get their needs met in real time when they have a question. I had a team that had sprint planning at 4 o'clock in the morning. And so if the product owner, you can imagine if the product owner was on the west coast of the United States, as he was, if they actually had a question that they couldn't get answered, how long they would have to wait for him to answer. So it really is best if you can have some good real-time collaboration. It's best when priorities don't change on a daily basis. So you should really have a couple of sprints in the backlog all ready and story pointed for the teams to take up. But if you have priorities changing on a daily basis, then that is kind of wasteful work that you might do if you never actually get to it. And so Scrum is best for when priorities, they might change some and they might sort of shift a little bit, but they don't change radically on a daily basis. When your stakeholders are easily accessible, when you have the product owner easily available or the business owner easily available, that's when Scrum is best. When you have organizations with a steady pace of work, so what I mean by that is you have a new product coming out and your team knows that they're going to be working on this new product for a while. It's not a new product development today and maintenance tomorrow, and they're really not sure what to do next week because they really can't forecast anything. They really can't get their sprint set up, and they'll never have this, their own steady velocity to work on. So it's organization with a steady pace of work like that, that Scrum is best. And the last thing is, and I'll keep bringing this up as we go through our talk, is environments which encourage collaboration are really best for Scrum, because otherwise you're not going to see the benefits of Scrum. Does anyone have any questions at this time? I guess you can paste it in the chat window, and Isaac can read them to me.
I haven't gotten any questions yet in the Q&A tab. So anybody, as we go, if any come up and you just have a question or something you want to stick out there, feel free to put it in the Q&A tab, and we'll collect those for Heidi when she hits a break like this. But none at the moment. You're doing a great job.
Thank you so much. Yep, got a lot of slides to go through today. So I'm going to start talking about Kanban. Kanban comes from lean manufacturing. And so lean aims to make the work simple enough to understand, do, and manage. So think about a production line. We're trying to deliver value, right? So Michael Sahota says Kanban has Agile on the inside. He's one of the thought leaders. He actually says Kanban is like a Trojan horse. He's seen teams spontaneously begin to collaborate when doing Kanban, so people don't think they're getting Kanban, but they really, or sorry, getting Agile, but they really are. Al Shalloway, who's another CEO of Net Objectives, has been doing software development for 40 years almost. He says Kanban is a second-generation Agile method. And David Anderson, the father of Kanban for software, says Kanban is an alternative path to agility. So I'm definitely going to say that Kanban is Agile. And the Kanban method is a model for introducing change via incremental improvement. So as David Anderson, it's a process to change the process. So you can't actually have a new team set up and tell them that you want them to do Kanban, because it doesn't have any steps of its own. It just takes your current process. And so this is something that you should be aware of. If you have a brand new team, they cannot do Kanban. David Anderson, when he worked at Microsoft, he was doing some Agile Scrum teams, and his directors were so happy they wanted him to spread this around the company, and so he tried to grow these Agile teams, and he was encountering resistance at the leadership level, and he tried to figure out why he was encountering resistance to change, and he did lots of studies on human psychology, and he discovered that people just don't like change in general, especially in large organizations. And so the major goal of Kanban and his thought process was to improve this performance with minimal resistance by making gradual improvements. And so that's the whole idea behind his Kanban method. Kanban matches the amount of work in progress to the team's capacity. So we're going to talk a lot about work in process limits. So we're never going to take on more work than we can comfortably handle at one time. This is another tenet of Kanban. Kanban is sometimes misunderstood to mean only a visual aid, and people talk about Kanban boards all the time, and that's great. But in the Kanban for software method, David Anderson says that if you're not doing the process improvement part of Kanban, but you're doing the other parts of Kanban, it's a little bit like doing Agile and not being Agile. So process improvement is a major part of the Kanban process. The board actually visualizes the entire service delivery workflow process, the work in progress, and the Kanban. So the Kanban are actually the slots for work, the slots available for work. And so in a couple of pages, you're going to see me show a Kanban board. And so the Kanban is actually, they're not actually the stickies, but it's the amount of work that you can actually comfortably fit in that box. So Kanban has 4 principles. Start with what you do now. We agree that the process that you do now is probably pretty good, so we're going to start with what you do now. But we're going to also agree that we need to pursue some change because it's not actually a perfect process. So while we try to change the process little by little, we're going to respect the current process roles and responsibilities and titles of everybody. So unlike Scrum, we're not going to hire a Scrum Master or product owner and send them all to training and completely change the way your work is done. We're going to keep everything the same, and we're going to visualize the work, and we're going to make small changes. And then David Anderson says you should always wait for the second version of any book, because he actually added step number 4 recently, because he realized that it needs active leadership in order to make change. Why? Because the people who are closest to the work and are aware of what changes need to be made often have the least power in an organization. When you think about it in your Scrum teams or your teams and they're working, they know the issues that exist on their team level. And so you need those people to actually stand up and say, hey, I think this could be made better. And so this is one of the principles that he added, right? Kanban has 6 general practices. So we are going to visualize the workflow, right, which we're going to include the workflow in this. And we're also going to do the actual workflow. The mistake that people often make is the business has created a process that the team should follow. But this is not the process that you're going to map. The team is not actually following that process. The team is going to map out their actual process. And now you're going to start limiting the work in process. The more work that you take on, the less efficient you are at actually delivering that work. As an example, I had a team, again, of architects, and they just took whoever screamed most loudly that day. And so they had each about 13 or 14 items in progress apiece, and they were never really delivering anything. So the idea is to start getting things done. Manage your flow. Ideally, you want a fast, smooth flow. So what should that the architect team do? What they should do is actually say, well, I have something already almost ready to test. Can I finish this before starting the next one and not just changing priorities so rapidly without actually completing anything? So the whole team is going to work to get things done. And here in this Kanban board, you are going to make policies explicit. So these are exit criteria for each stage, like a definition of done for each stage. And so this is very important in Kanban. In Scrum, you have a definition of ready and you have a definition of done all the way at the end. But in Kanban, you actually have this exit criteria for each and every stage. So it should be very clear when it's ready for the next stage. And we work on a pull system, so we're not pushing work to the team. We're waiting for the team to be ready. You see this 5 and this 3 here, and this is the Kanban. This is the work in process limits. So imagine that there's already a limit here. We're not going to pull more than this work in process. We're going to implement feedback loops because that's the only way that we can get better. And last, we are going to improve collaboratively, and we're going to experiment by changing our process around when we think it's necessary. We're going to take a look at whether or not that's working for us by using a scientific method. And so this is all part of the Kanban method, right? So why is Kanban great? David Anderson thinks that this is an adaptive capability for an organization. So to be anti-fragile, you need to keep adapting your process so the team is now free to change the process to deliver value for the business, where processes emerge rather than being designed from the top down. They are now emerging from the bottom up and allowing the business to respond to complex environments and new business challenges. So you do have some requirements for Kanban. You need a high degree of visibility into the work process for Kanban. So people need to know what kinds of work are happening. You need a respect for the WIP limits. So in this case, teams cannot take on all this work like 13 things in progress, and they actually need, the teams and management need to have respect for the work in process limits and not take on more than they can handle. You need a commitment to that pull-based flow. So again, the team is not, work is not being forced onto the team, it's pull-based flow, right? A focus on quality. So just like in Scrum, we really need to focus on quality. Again, it's much more expensive to touch something 2 times around or more, so we really want to focus on quality the first time. And the important thing here is the board reflects the work. It doesn't direct people's work. And I had a team that I was doing a Kanban workshop with, and all of a sudden they got really nervous about putting their exit criteria and defining their workflow, because it finally came out that they were doing unit testing after they had actually coded, because they didn't believe they had the time to do it. And so this was an area that you actually need to be careful of the team. The team actually tells you how their work is actually going, not the ideal process that they think it should work. So there are times when Kanban won't work as well. When you think about it, if Kanban takes your current process and makes gradual improvements, but your existing process is so bad that you don't want to use it anymore, then Kanban is not the appropriate place. You should figure out a new process that might work for you, and then you can do Kanban over that process, but you can't do Kanban if there's no process at all. When the team can't discuss the sources of dissatisfaction openly, remember that team needs to take leadership and discuss their sources of dissatisfaction and their issues. And let's say, like the team I was discussing before, they needed more QA to handle all the development work. And imagine if they were afraid to bring this up to management. Or if management kept pushing work on the team and they couldn't respect those work in process limits, then this would be a place where the team needs to discuss it openly. And if they can't, then Kanban may not be the best place for you. So yes, management won't respect those WIP limits. It just won't work for Kanban, because a lot of times people are afraid to push back. Remember how we talked about exit criteria, like definitions are done in each stage. And if the team isn't willing to define the exit criteria to make those policies explicit, in this case I was telling you they were really reluctant to do so because it would reflect poorly on them. So the team actually needs to be open and define the exit criteria. So you need to start somewhere before you can improve. And let's say the team likes their current process altogether and they don't think that it needs any improvement at all, then Kanban is not the best place. Okay, so Kanban has some great advantages. You can use your current process. So you can basically go to work and start tomorrow. You get visible progress in each stage. So unlike in Scrum, when you just have to do and progress and done, if you have some micromanaging managers, they want to come and look at your work, they can tell exactly what stage it is at each day when they come and look at it. You can get priorities that change anytime. You're committing to work at the very last moment in Kanban. And so you're not setting up 2-week sprints ahead of time or 3-week sprints ahead of time and doing the whole backlog prioritization. Your priorities can change at any time, and you can even establish like a rush system where the things that are highest priority can actually get taken care of right away. So this is very common in Kanban, especially with maintenance teams and teams that handle production issues. You have a continuous flow versus a start-stop. If you have a team that's been doing Scrum for a while, let's say, and they want to move to a continuous flow versus a start-stop, then Kanban might be a place that works. Or let's just say you have a maintenance team when time boxing doesn't make sense. If they're just doing maintenance tickets and they have this continuous flow, then there's no reason to actually stop and do the time boxing. It provides no extra value. You've got fewer organizational, personnel, and setup changes. You don't have to hire a Scrum Master. You don't have to designate anyone a product owner if you don't want to. And if they don't exist already, you can start with the same team that you have now. One of the great advantages of Kanban is that a person doesn't have to be dedicated 100% to a sprint or a team, and you can have those specialized skills like I talked about earlier, and it's going to work perfectly fine, whereas in Scrum, because you're committing to that time box, it's person really should be dedicated 100% to a sprint or team, or they may not meet their sprint commitment. And one of the other advantages is lead times emerge versus the team predicting how much they're going to do. So over a period of time in your Kanban system, you can delineate your types of work and say, this type of work takes me 3 days, this type of work takes me 5 days, or this type of work only takes me 2 hours. So you can actually have classes of work and be able to predict using mathematical models how long it will take you to deliver something. And this is really one of the best benefits in my mind of Kanban, because in Scrum, you never actually go back and see whether that 8 was actually estimated correctly, or most teams don't actually go back and do that, so that's great. And so I'm going to talk here about the conditions that Kanban is best. And this is not the only conditions, but these are some of the conditions that's work. And I talked about this a little bit before, but platform and component teams, when you don't have cross-functional teams, when you have support and maintenance teams, or let's say you just have a large team. I had a team that was 18 people. They were cross-functional, but at a point where the team gets too large for Scrum, then you might want to consider a Kanban, right? If a team is reluctant to make big changes, so they know they want to make some changes, but they're really reluctant to move to Scrum, then you might want to try Kanban. If you have a situation like I do where my teams want to add stories on the fly all the time, and they really can't plan 1 or 2 sprints ahead of time in their backlog, then this Kanban is great for that situation. And if you don't need iterations, like I was talking about the maintenance team or even a research team where it provides little value to do iterations. And when estimation isn't necessary, this is a great place where you can use those lead times instead of velocity metrics if nobody really cares about those points. And if you want the ability to release any time and you don't want to be stuck in this rut of releasing every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever your cadence is in Scrum, then you can release any time. As soon as you get enough items in the bucket at the end, in the done bucket, you can release in Kanban. So it's totally up to you. You can release after 1 item. You can release after 50 items in Kanban. Kanban also focuses on delivery flow. So remember I was saying you should have fast, smooth flow across the Kanban board. And so teams often want to look at how their work flows across the board, and if it's taking too long, they can actually look at ways to improve that delivery flow. So this is a great place where you can do Kanban. And the last thing that I want to address is very important. A lot of teams that are actually dealing with it. Aside from all these other challenges, their culture is just skeptical of Agile or won't mesh with Scrum principles. And I actually had a meeting with someone from a large company the other day. He said, our culture will not accept Scrum, so I think that we should start with Kanban. And I thought that was a great and enlightened statement from this CIO, because you can just see how Scrum could just be still micromanaging the team. The Scrum Master turns into a taskmaster, and it's really not what Scrum was intended to be. So if you think your culture will not accept those Scrum principles of self-organizing teams, then Kanban really might be a best place for you to start. Does anyone have any questions about Kanban? So I know we don't have that much time left, and I'd love to talk about Scrumban, so let me know if any burning questions.
Yeah, so we got a couple questions. Jeff, do you want to tee up the first one there that came through?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of relates to the previous section to Scrum.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so if Scrum is not the best fit for orgs with distributed teams, what is?
So you can do Scrum with distributed teams, but it's going to be a bit of a more challenge. So let me go into more depth in that. Let's say that you have a person away on the West Coast and then all the other team in India. So if you can figure out a way to have good collaboration and good communication, then it could work. And this is the thing that people don't realize is they say, I don't need any documentation because we're doing Scrum. But if you have some of those challenges, in order to facilitate communication, you'll need to have more documentation and more of these other kinds of things to facilitate. And so it really depends on how the team is reacting to it. If the team is able to overcome these challenges by doing just enough documentation and just enough communication to still manage to commit and deliver on their commitments, then that's great. If it becomes too challenging, like my team that was spread across 5 time zones, And then the best idea is to move to a Kanban system or Scrumban system. So I'll go into that into more detail next. But so it really depends on the team.
Okay, great.
One more question came in. With Scrum, our management measures velocity. What is the measurement for Kanban?
It's lead time and cycle time. And so basically you look at how long each ticket takes to go from to do at committed to done. You can even take a look at the time from the time the request is committed to the time the team picks it up and the time it gets completed. So there's lead time and cycle time. Lead time is the whole entire time since the submission of the request, and cycle time is that time. So you basically look and you classify your work types, like I said, to have, this kind of work takes me a few hours, this kind of work takes me a few days, and you can actually get super great at estimating when your stuff is going to be done.
So if I could inject on that for just a second, and one thing, when you think of the world of shu-ha-ri, as you start getting into injecting more of lean, you have lead time, cycle time, and one thing you could overlay to that process is the value stream mapping. How can we increase that? What handoffs can we eliminate? And is there anything we could do better? So you're always kind of looking for that constant, continuous improvement, which is Kaizen.
Right, definitely. I think that's a mistake that a lot of organizations make too. I actually cut that slide out of this webinar because this webinar this talk is already very long, but it's, you should be absolutely delivering value. And if you don't have a way to have feedback to make sure that you're delivering the right stuff, then all of these agile processes are only of limited value. Okay.
So I got one more thing to bring up real quick before we slide on, and it's something that I want to point out because we still have a lot of attendees on right now, and we're going to get ready to segue in just a second. But one of the things, and I've worked with many teams, that we've had a really tough time doing is honoring WIP limits, the work in progress limits. And it's just very difficult because it's a mindset change. So for instance, even it's not just management forcing it upon a team, but a lot of times I work with developers on a development team, and they make excuses for not managing WIP limits like, well, the business needs all this done anyway, or I'm blocked with these two other things, so I shifted to the third thing when I really know I should only have two. And it's real tough to manage that. So what kind of tips would you give, Heidi, for honoring work in progress limits?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, what kind of tips? Yeah, what kind of tips?
Work in progress?
Yeah, what kind of tips for managing that?
So actually, you should talk to the team about that. The team should definitely discuss together how much work in process is going to be most efficient for them. So think about if they have a question waiting on something, are they able to take something else in progress? So really, it's a conversation and a workshop that needs to happen with the team. But management should also be involved because think about it, if you're going to the coffee shop and the espresso machine takes, 5 espressos and they're all busy, and you say, well, I want an espresso. And they're like, well, you would never say that. You have to wait. But knowledge work is just invisible, and people don't think about that all the time. And so if we make it visible about all these things that are in process, then oftentimes that kind of cuts out that conversation from management to start another thing, because you can actually show very visually what's going on. But I can't state, what are some best tips other than if you make it visual, management will see what's going on and hopefully understand. You can lobby to finish what you have in progress. And the amount of things that the team can take on is totally a matter of how long each item takes for the team and how many items they think they can handle at one particular time. And we have workshops on that we typically do.
Excellent. Hey, Heidi, thank you. I'm going to break in here real quick. Just want to make sure that I honor the time of those who have joined and who do have a hard stop and are going to have to leave us. So we're going to pass it right back over to Heidi, and she's going to continue into overtime to keep going on with the next segment. But I want to wrap up for those who do have to drop with just a quick announcement or two. First of all, we're working on our speaker for December, so our next meeting will be sent out to everybody who has attended this meeting on the Meetup and in WebEx. We'll send out that information as soon as we finalized our speaker. We're hopefully going to have a dynamic speaker to close out the year with. If you have an idea or want to help with a future meeting, please do contact us. We're interested in improving time over time, so if you have a topic or something to go forward, please kick it in here. Also, when you leave, there'll be a post-event survey. Please fill that out and give us any other ideas so that we can get better as we go forward. One question that did come in is we are going to send out this slide deck as we wrap up our content. So you should be getting that, and I'll be able to send out a link to the recording as well if you have to drop off now. So you can catch the last 15, 20 minutes of Heidi talking when you have time. If you can stay with us, please do. I'm going to pass it back to Heidi, like I said, and she'll finish out. But for those who do need to drop because they have a hard stop, I want to say thank you for joining us, and we want to respect your time and let you go when we thought we would previously. So, all right, Heidi, I'm going to kick it back over to you, and you can finish up with your last 15 minutes. Question and answer will still be open if you guys want to throw some stuff in there.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to everybody who attended. You guys have all been awesome so far. And Heidi, the first part's been great. I'm looking forward to the resolution.
Great, awesome. So, trying to get rid of that bar. So, we've talked about Kanban, we've talked about Scrum. They do have some similarities, as I'm sure you can see. We're trying to release often. We're trying to be collaborative. We have feedback loops built in. We're really focused on quality, transparency, and so I have lots of stuff here, and they are similar. And they have some differences, and I'll actually send out some information on the actual differences and a whole chart afterwards. But what's really important is some common scenarios where Kanban will work best. So Kanban seems to work best where there's maintenance and research work where time boxing adds overhead with little value, where estimation isn't really needed. Where teams are too large for Scrum and you can't break them up. Let's say you have a Scrum team and it just keeps growing. You get more work, and there's really no way to break it up into two teams. Sometimes that just happens where you can't deliver value with two smaller teams and be just as efficient. People who are nervous about Agile and don't see how it will work for them. People, including management, might be nervous about Agile. People with specialized skills who aren't 100% dedicated to teams. And while people think that Scrum will work everywhere, think about it. It's just if you have those very specialized skills and they can't sit on your team, then it might not be the best place for Scrum, but it will work with Kanban. And then to move on from there, why did Kanban work where Scrum won't work? Kanban manages pieces of a chaotic environment really well because you can have all those steps delineated. You have that exit criteria, so everything is just very well transparently delineated. And so it does manage that chaotic environment as well, whereas you can imagine if you just had something in progress and management is unable to see what step of the process it actually is in, or what are we waiting for. Imagine that it's an external dependency, or you're waiting for the product owner to come back with a question, that's not as visible as in Kanban. So you can make those issues more transparent in a Kanban. Specialization is often the only viable route in organizations. Not everybody can be a cross-functional team, and oftentimes, like in my previous assignment where we had specialized knowledge that had been garnered over the years about artificial intelligence and interfacing with back-end systems, very specialized systems, and that person could not sit on the team, so that's not a Scrum team that's going to work. It's designed to take into consideration people's fear of change and be adopted in an incremental way, unlike Scrum, where they just kind of toss you in the icy ocean and say, you know, sink or swim, let's go for it. And sometimes it works, but sometimes the situation is just that it won't work very well. If the situation is one of those other scenarios that I said. So, and then the last thing is Kanban trusts teams to improve the process. So instead of the Scrum Master being the process person on the team, Kanban actually trusts the teams to inspect the process and adapt as required. So I'm almost ready to talk about Scrumban, but just to finish out the Scrum versus Kanban, right? If your organization is really stuck and needs a big change, and you have someone willing to commit to this change and willing to lead, like I said in the beginning, you need a good and committed leader, then you can start with Scrum. But you should start with Kanban if your culture just isn't willing to accept the mindset shift organization-wide, or you have a decent process in place and you want to improve it over time. So these are just some considerations and some thoughts of Scrum versus Kanban. So now the moment everybody's been waiting for, I'm going to start talking about Scrumban. So Corey Lattis in 2009, he actually thought that he was going to devise a method to add pull, flow, and throughput metrics to Scrum and reduce some overhead with planning batch transfers, but he never thought that Scrumban was going to be a thing that people wanted to stick with. He envisioned it on the way to a better process, that teams might stop here for a little while. So he actually thought it was just a stopping place for people to have even more evolved process. And then in 2012, Ajay Reddy came out, and his point is, Scrumban is the Kanban method applied to Scrum as the starting and underlying process framework. So you're still doing Scrum, but you're thinking about adding these other things that Kanban has. And then also to tell you that Scrumban has evolved as a framework over the years, but there's no definitive guide or definition. So if you look, if you Google Scrumban, you're going to come out with a whole bunch of different things. And so what I've done is take Ajay Reddy's book on Scrumban, the Revolution, and I've defined it as Corey Lattis and Ajay Reddy have defined it as the fathers of Scrumban. So what is Scrumban? You can have the defined roles of Scrum, like the product owner and Scrum Master, if you wish, but the frequency of those Scrum ceremonies can vary. So for example, if you have priorities handed to you all the time, like I had in a previous role, and you don't need to sit and have those sprint planning sessions, then you can definitely not have those as frequently. Now you can specialize and break out your columns, your teams, and your functions as you wish. This doesn't mean you must, and this is an area where I just want to tell you that Scrum people who love Scrum more than Kanban, they say Kanban breaks up teams and it doesn't allow for teamwork. Remember, Kanban is only as delineated as you make it. So don't let those Scrum people say that it's going to break up teams, because I actually had a team that was doing Kanban remove some steps from their process so they could be more collaborative. So you don't have to break out every single step. It's just as defined as you want it. In this case, the board stays persistent. When stuff gets done, you can release it, but you're not removing everything from the board at once, and you typically have things in process even if you are releasing. So those things definitely are not wiped from the board. We talked about work in process limits, and you're definitely thinking about how to improve by those work in process limits. And so instead of everybody taking on work and then hoping it's done at the end of the sprint, now team members will assist each other to get stuff done. And so if something has been sticking on the board there for a few days longer than normal, the team stands in front and says, this has been sitting here for 4 days now, how can we get it done? And so it's definitely a team approach to getting things done. Because if you're measuring cycle time and lead time, it's very important to always be focused on getting that item done and not letting it stagnate there on the board. You're committing to tasks at the last possible moment. So unlike Scrum, when you're committing to 2 weeks or 3 weeks of work ahead of time, in Kanban, you can replenish the board as often as you need, or, so let's say I had a team that was replenishing once a day or once a week or every few days. So it really depends on the team, but until you take it and you commit to it, then you're not really ready to work on it. So you're not really committing to it until the very, very last moment when you're almost ready to start working on it. And ideally, if you're, that might make some people nervous, but if you're delivering, then people begin to like that you're able to take stuff on and deliver very rapidly. And so that's a real benefit. We're going to focus on getting those tasks done, each task, not on the sprint level, but on the task and the story level. Estimation and prioritization are completely optional in Scrum, at Scrumban, because you are actually going to look at those lead and cycle times. And you could have one team taking work from different backlogs. As an example of that, I worked for an insurance company, and we handled different states. In addition to handling different states, we had different systems, right? You had an agent required system. So the agent had to log in, and that was their system. You had the user, the end user customer, who needed to log in and look at their policy information. That needed to be updated. And then from a company perspective, on the very back end, from the employee perspective, so we had a ton of different backlogs, and then we all put them into one board, and we took care of them that way. So that's a great way that you can use Scrumban. And Scrumban is good for Scrum team grows, and there's no easy way to split it. A fast-paced and dynamic place, like startups. For example, the startup that I worked in, where the CEO would come and say, hey, stop everything, I want you to work on this now, because it allows you to commit to things at the very last moment. And then you can only take on those things without thinking about abandoning work or wasting work. You can have multiple team ownership, like I did on my other team with the insurance agency, that we took stuff from multiple boards and we actually had multiple team ownership. A Scrum team doesn't want to use time boxes anymore, and they think they want to evolve from that process, and they can release whenever they want. This is a great place for Scrumban. Or if the team just wants to add more steps into their process, and they're not just good with doing, in process and done. And I know a lot of teams already do this, where they add a test, specific test step in there if they have that skill set on their team. And so you're already doing a little bit more of a Scrumban process. If you have dependencies to external specialties, and so if you have dependencies to external specialties, this is a way that you can have exit criteria before it goes to that external specialty and when it comes back. And imagine that external person takes 4 or 5 days to actually get back to you. This is a way where you can actually improve the process by making this visible. And so when there are dependencies like that, it's important to know where's the holdup really happening. There was a company that actually spent millions of dollars training their developers on XP, and the CEO thought that it was going to be so efficient and the developers were going to get much, much faster, so they were going to deliver things more rapidly, and it didn't make a dent. Like, it didn't improve at all. It was barely measurable. So he was complaining to this one consultant, and what did he do? He didn't measure the wait time. Most of the delay in a system does not happen in the development time or the testing time, but it happens in the wait time. And so this is great where you want to make things visible like this. So the Scrum team wants to improve their flow and lead times. So definitely that can, that can go to whether it's external specialties or internal specialties. You can look at how long does it take to get something done. Do we need to make our stories smaller? So I had this question in my last talk. So how do I start doing Scrumban, right? Start with what you do now, and then you're going to add elements of either Scrum or Kanban that you think would be useful. So you pick what's right for you. Do you want to start measuring lead and cycle time? Do you want to start observing work in process limits because your team takes on too many things and nothing ever gets done at the end of the sprint? Do you want to add or remove time boxes? You can start adding exit criteria. And so once you have selected things that you'd like to add from Kanban, you can now inspect and adapt. So it can be an adaptive process as well, and that's how you start doing Scrumban. So I talked a lot about evolutions, like Scrumban can be an evolution to Scrum or away from Scrum, or Kanban as well. You can start doing Kanban to get away from waterfall, or you can do Kanban to get away from Scrum, but you don't have to move away from anything. Imagine that you have a highly productive Scrum team. I just want to point this out real quickly. You can have hyper-productive Scrum metrics and where you can actually get better in the Scrum space. So I don't want you to think that I'm encouraging you to move from one way or the other, but it just really depends on your team. So at the end of our conversation here, right, what really matters? What's going to work for you? Over all the things that I told you, the best framework depends on your project, your team, and your goals. You should take principles and practices from Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, and other frameworks and thought process as needed. And of course, you should involve the team in those decisions because they might have ideas of their own. And I definitely encourage trying other things aside from Scrum, Kanban, and Scrumban to integrate into your processes. So that's all I have for today.
Great job, Heidi. That was really awesome. That was incredible presentation, and I'm getting a lot of comments personally that this is very a lot of people are experiencing a lot of the things that you're bringing up, and a lot of people are commenting to me that what you're presenting on has been very useful to them. And I'll touch on one thing real quick because I've heard you say it a bunch of times. You use the word framework and you use the word Agile, and I know we have varying different skill sets out there watching this presentation, but I think it's very important for the people listening to Heidi to understand that Agile is not a process. That is totally misconstrued. Agile is a philosophy, it's principles, it's values, and it's a mindset. And we as a culture of Agilists and coaches and Scrum Masters have to understand that that mindset has to be there. They have to adhere to those principles and values. I would say Kanban or Scrum or any of these frameworks, the framework is the tool to engage that mindset. It's the way that you get things done when that mindset is there. And it's kind of like the shoe to the right size foot, and you want to get that perfect fit. And Heidi, you could take it away and correct me if I'm wrong there, but I just wanted to make that delineation because a lot of people get that messed up between what Agile really is and what a framework really is.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And so I tried to bring that up multiple times, that if your culture is not going to be collaborative and Scrum is about self-organizing teams, then you're really going to miss a lot of that value that it brings. Innovative teams come up with great ideas, but if there are tasks being pushed to them, then they won't have those ideas. And so Michael Sahota has this awesome diagram that basically says you can get a few times, like a 2 to 3 times improvement in value if you move just to doing the processes, but you can have a 20 times benefit if you have the right mindset and you allow your teams to be innovative. But as far as what you said about the shoe to the right size fit, you definitely have to customize your process, because these people who are thinking about frameworks and the people who thought about Scrum framework, they definitely weren't thinking of your organization. I've heard of Jeff Sutherland. I've heard Jeff Sutherland speaking, and he talks about how his teams, he only allows them to be up to 9 people, and then he makes them break up into smaller teams if they want to go past 9 people, and his high-performing teams. And the reality, though, also is that not every single team is high-performing. Not every single manager is a Jeff Sutherland who will allow those teams to be innovative and do their most awesome work. So definitely the right process for even the stage that you're in your organization. Even if you'd like to go to Scrum, you might start with something like Kanban and introduce it, or introduce Scrum in 1 or 2 teams and see how that goes, and make it successful, and then grow from there. But definitely agree with everything you said. It's totally a mindset.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any other questions? Maybe drop them in the question box or the comment box there. We'll just give a couple more seconds to see if any more come in. I just want to echo kind of what Jeff said. This is just excellent, very good overview, Heidi. I loved how you built a very clear understanding of Scrum and then of Kanban, and then seeing the balance of both. And the thing that, for me, that stood out, the takeaway for me is that, we as Agile coaches, Agile practitioners, more than just saying, here's a one-size-fit-all, really our goal is to learn tools and tricks and things that we can use, and then to assess the situation like a doctor does and use the right tool in the right situation. Or go back to your first slide where you said, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We got to come in and say, okay, what type of problem is this? What type of environment is this team in? And then pick the framework that best influences that environment. So excellent thoughts there.
We as coaches should have lots of ideas in our toolkit, and this is how we build them. So I'm happy to share, and I'm really glad. Thank you for inviting me to speak today.
Great. Well, it's been our pleasure. So I don't see any more questions, so I think we will just wrap up. Jeff was just posting out there, don't hesitate to reach out if we can help you in any way, or if you want to get involved with doing these webinars, please let us know. Again, Heidi, thank you so much for your time, and Jeff as well. And that's going to be it for us today. So thank you if you stuck in with us all the way to the end. Thanks for sticking in with us, and we will see you guys next time, hopefully in December. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Heidi, Jeff, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks,
later. Bye-bye.